And we're live. All right, cool. Hey, Blag, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thanks, Ash. You?
Yeah, really good. So it's our it's right before a four day weekend at Nylas, and so I think normally we're currently aiming to do these live streams like on a Wednesday and on a Friday most weeks. But since we're going to be off vacationing. I don't know what you're doing. I don't even know what I'm doing. But tomorrow we won't be live streaming. That's for sure. So we're doing it on Thursday instead.
Yep.
I'll do a quick sort of just like, hey everybody, I'm Ash. You can see it right there in the window. You can find me at @AshRyan_IO on Twitter, and I'm the director of developer relations here at Nylas.
And hi, I'm Blag. My hashtag is @Blag at Twitter. I'm a senior developer advocate here at Nylas. So let's get started.
Cool. Yeah, so we're here today to talk about webhooks, right?
Yep.
Look at that. Fancy. So the title of our live stream and soon to be a blog post and another repo of sample code from you, Blag, on testing webhooks using the Nylas CLI, which we just talked about the other day, and then also Ruby, which actually we haven't really done anything in Ruby on this live stream before, but Nylas offers a Ruby SDK, and you've been doing a lot of tremendous work, kind of unpacking how to help developers get the most out of the Ruby SDK.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I thought. I wanted to do something different this time. I mean, like you said, all of our live streams have been Python so far, and why not Ruby? Let's do something fun with Ruby.
Yeah, sure. Why not Ruby? And then at some point, I want to see some Node.js. I mean, like I will at some point, like we'll get to play with a lot of different things. But interestingly, I guess this is the third programming language that has been featured in the live stream so far. Interestingly, the second one was R. So yeah, today we're going to talk about, when we talk about webhooks, you'll get to see some code in Ruby, but we'll actually be starting in the command line as well. Keep in mind, if you're following along, none of this is going to be Ruby specific in the context of Nylas. So, you know, if you want to use our Node SDK or Python SDK or Java SDK, you'll still be supported, you know, or if you're building without our SDKs, you can also do the same things.
Yeah, you can actually use like C# or Clojure or PHP or Elixir or whatever you want.
Cool. And maybe someday we'll get to all that.
Yeah,
For
totally.
now, I guess like one of the good places to start is really, okay, so what's this whole webhook thing in the first place, right? This is not obviously it's not a Nylas specific concept, but there are folks out there that of course they've been there and done that. They know what webhooks are, but let's just start by helping people who haven't had any interaction with webhooks before think a little bit about the concept.
Yeah, so pretty much a webhook is kind of like a notification that you're gonna get for a certain action or trigger. So let's say, for example, like when you send an email or when you open an email, there's gonna be a webhook launch. And this is important because you as a developer, you don't need to be calling the server saying like, is there a webhook? No, actually, the server is gonna send you a message once something happens. So you send an email, the server is going to send you a webhook message. So you can just open it and you can use the information you have inside to do whatever you want, whatever you need. So that keeps the load of your application.
Yeah, I love that as an explanation, right? So, the scenario that you described that we want to avoid usually as developers is sort of like constantly pinging some service and saying, hey, something changed.
Exactly.
And it's not only that you constantly have to do that, but then the work is on you to figure out usually what changed. So instead of that, that by the way is called polling, right? So frequently, there are use cases for polling that are valid, but most of the time, when what we're trying to do is keep up to date on things that are happening from some other service like Nylas, for example, then like the webhooks are an awesome solution for that, right? Because essentially you kind of, in a typical REST scenario where you're calling an API service, you're making requests and you're getting responses, right? And so you kind of end up flipping that and instead set up a situation where the service calls you. And it's still these HTTP, it's just, there's nothing magic there. It's still HTTP, but it's like now you're saying, hey, service, call my server when something has changed. And we'll get into the details but like in Nylas land, it might be, for example, when someone sends a message, an email message, through a connected account, or maybe they create a new draft or whatever it is. And we'll kind of walk through what the menu of options are. But just keep in mind that with webhooks, what we're saying is that we're setting up a situation where Nylas can call our application, us being the developer building with Nylas, and give us updates on the fly.
Yeah, exactly. So just to begin with, we're going to start with showing the Nylas CLI and how can you use that to kind of like test webhooks. So let me share my screen. So I have here my terminal. What we need to do is, if we have the Nylas CLI installed, of course, we just need to type in Nylas. Then we need to choose webhooks, which is going to basically create a webhook service inside one of Nylas servers. So it's going to already create it for us. Then we need to pass tunnel, which is actually going to start listening from incoming webhooks.
So the tunnel command basically says, hey, webhook, start listening.
Yes, exactly.
And sorry, actually, I guess, let me say that a different way. It's telling the CLI to listen for REST calls from the Nylas service into your CLI.
Exactly. And then print just help us to print the payload in a nicer way, so we can see what's going on the console. So once I print return, it's going to open a tunnel to the Nylas server, and it's going to wait for events. So if I go to my connected account here and I send an email to myself, just saying like testing webhooks with the Nylas CLI, I'm going to send it. And I just need to wait for a second just to get that email, which is going to be in a sec.
It's going around the world on its way back to you.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see that we're doing this live. It's not recorded. It's completely live. So you can see I got the email.
Nice.
So if I go back, you can see that I have all the information for the webhook that I just received. So I have here the date in epoch format. It was a message. A message was created. I have the namespace, the account, object, some attributes, and everything.
So let's talk a little bit about like what happened there, and we won't take a deep peek under the hood, but someone might say, for example, wait, you just sent yourself an email and now your terminal knows about it. But we'll actually walk through a little more of the setup once we get into the Ruby code. But the CLI is the same concept, which is essentially you have set up exactly like what event you care about and want to hear about on the CLI side, and then Nylas knows, thanks to the Nylas CLI, it knows how to reach out and send data to your terminal. And in this case, it gave you that JSON object that you see right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's all because I use my connected account. So if I use any other account to send an email to any other account, nothing is going to happen. But if my connected account is somehow related to the operation, then we're going to get something here, like a webhook response. But yeah,
I think for this particular side of the demo, like, just showing that it's possible in the CLI, and we have documentation, and you'll have a blog post that's going to talk about how to get this kind of thing set up. But I think where it may feel even, more, let's say, intuitive as we start digging into the Ruby code, where we can actually see like the code, like what you're writing, and also like how you are telling Nylas where to reach out to your server and all of that kind of thing. So before we wrap up on the CLI side of things, is there anything else that you want to call out here?
Well, just this thing that using the Nylas CLI is a really easy way to test webhooks and to see what's the information coming from the webhook. Almost everything is registered, so it's something nice. So actually, if I go and I say Nylas webhook panel, then here I'm gonna have down below, I can say triggers, and it's a trigger that is registered from the webhook. And here I'm gonna have all the possibilities. So I can specify that probably I just want message created, or maybe I can say that I want message created and also message open, and also message bounced if the email wasn't being able to be delivered. If we don't specify anything, then all the triggers are going to be there by default. But we have the option to actually specify which ones we want to check or to apply.
That's really cool. So I think if high level takeaway is, if you're looking to kind of just get started and kick the tires on webhooks with Nylas, like the CLI's got you, and this is like a really nice way to get started with it. And if you want to make it even nicer, we did a live stream recently about our collaboration with a company called Fig that gives you all these nice autocompletes that you're showing us here as you type commands. So I'd say that if you're looking to get started with webhooks and Nylas, like check out our CLI. And if you want to enhance that experience, install Fig, and you'll get all the autocompletes that go along with it.
Exactly. So I guess we can kind of show what I did on the Ruby side.
Let's do it.
So perfect. So let me stop sharing my screen for a second so I can see myself better. So for this, I use Ruby. Like Ash mentioned, I can have used anything else, really. I use Sinatra because I like micro frameworks. I use Heroku because it's kind of simple. I could have used like Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Services or whatever. I just kind of find Heroku easy to work with. And of course, I use Webhooks. So like I said, Sinatra is a web framework, which is micro framework for Ruby. And then let me now share my screen to see the demo in action. So what I did first, I created everything on Heroku. So I had it here. And here on config bars, which I'm not going to reveal because it has all my configuration. But there I put like my client secret, my client ID, etc. The information coming from Nylas. So it's secured. So I don't have it like hard coded inside my Ruby application.
It's not dissimilar from using like an env file, like a .env file in your local, like in a local repo.
Yes, exactly. So here I have the application running. You see Blag, Ruby, Webhooks, Heroku app. So here I'm going to print the information of the webhook. Obviously, right now it's empty. I haven't done anything. So what I need to do is I need to go to my Nylas dashboard, go into webhooks, and then press create a webhook. Here on the callback URL, I need to pass the URL of my Ruby application. And then here, pass this webhook, which is just a method which is going to help us do the initial handshake and validation for the webhook, which we're going to explain a little bit more once we get into the code.
And so if we were to just reframe that, I'd say that, like, you're saying, hey, Nylas, when you don't, we're not going to call you, you call us when there's a change. And then we have to basically give them the phone number for that call, right? So in this case, it's an endpoint. So we just say, Nylas, this is where you should call my server when something happens that I'm interested in. And then we have the menu of possible things that we could be interested in. So why don't we have a look at this?
Yes. So here we have all the triggers that we can use. For now, we can say, okay, message created and message open. We can use all the others, like event created, calendar updated, but this time we're just focusing on kind of like email. So we're just gonna click on create webhook. And the webhook has been created. You see here that has been added. So there's a handshake that happens once we create the webhook. But now it's already gone. It's already working. So I can do exactly the same thing I did before. I just can go here and I can create, let's say, testing webhooks with Ruby. And say something here, hello, and then send it. So message was sent. I can refresh here just to make sure it's here. We have the Nylas CLI one. And with some here, testing webhooks with Ruby. So if we go back here we have the ID, the date it was sent, the title, who is coming from, who is getting the email, and we said that the message was created.
Right. So that again, like if you think back to, Blag just went into the Nylas dashboard and registered that URL that says, hey, Nylas, call my application. But when should we call the application? Well, I want to know when messages are created. And so you registered you're interested in that in the Nylas dashboard, as we just saw. And now anytime a new message is created through the connected account with that application in Gmail, like that notification is going to be sent to the endpoint in your application, which in this case was /webhook. What does it send? It sends this data. So you're printing it out nicely for us to look at. But under the hood, it's a JSON object that carries this data that you can do basically.
Formatting that nicely, yes. So actually, if I open and read the email, it says hello. That's nice. And I go back here. Well, at first I remember it should say that it was open. Probably was if I receive it. So let's try something real quick. Let's say I send another email. Hello back. Let's send it to my connected account. And I wait a little bit to receive it. Okay, here I open it up. And if I go back here, and did I actually register that message open? I think.
Yeah, you may have. Well, it looks like you have message open in there.
Yeah. Well, things that happen in live streams.
Yeah, live technical demos. But anyways, let's give that time and see if anything happens with it. But for now, the concept, is regardless of what you're interested in, like you're gonna get these notifications similar to the message.created one that you see there. So, well, there you go. Now you've got. That's another message created one. Anyways, we'll have to figure out what happened with the message opened. But in the interim, why don't we have a quick look at the code? Because I think that that's something, again, we've explained it at a high level, right? Yes. When the thing that you are interested in happens, Nylas is going to call your endpoint. But of course, there's some other setup required to get that working. Not too much. So let's have a quick look at what you have here in Ruby.
Yeah, sure. So here I'm just calling all my dependencies like Sinatra, and I'm using SQLite just to have something where I can put all the information. You can use wherever you want, but I just wanted to keep it there. So here is where I was saying, once you go here on the dashboard and you press create webhook, and then you pass the URL and just says message created, and then create webhook, what is going to happen is that Nylas is going to create this webhook method. So it's going to call this one, and it's going to make sure that a challenge is included. So that's kind of like the initial handshake. Is, for example, this doesn't work, then the webhook is not going to get created. So Nylas needs to know that this is a valid webhook.
Yeah, and so if we think about it more from like a REST perspective, like a REST API perspective, what it's doing is then Nylas is going to, because you've registered that URL, it's going to make a GET request to /webhook, which you just registered in the dashboard, and then you created that endpoint here in your server. You're using the Sinatra framework, so that's why it happens to look the way that it looks. But there's a gajillion ways to do this in basically every language that you might want to build a server in. This is a very simplified idea, right? But you can tell, okay, great. What that's doing is created an endpoint that takes GET requests,
Mhm.
and then it looks like once it does that, then it the body of that returns some sort of handshake, right? And again, that happens once you create the webhook. It's basically Nylas saying, "Hey, is this application actually there, and is it online? And
Yes.
is it the application that we expect it to be?"
Yes, exactly. And that only happens once you create the webhook. Once it's created and it's running, and we can see here that this one is running, and there's an action happening. So Nylas is going to send a request to the same webhook, but in a post way, not a get, but a post. And here it's going to verify that it's a real webhook call. So for that, we need to verify the signature, which is a method that we're going to see in a second. So it's basically going to compare our client secret with a signature that is coming from Nylas. So what we do here, we go to verify signature, which is here, which is pretty much it's gonna create a hex digit key, and it's gonna compare the two messages. If they're good, then we're good to go. And it's gonna do a secure comparison, like doing byte by byte, to see that the two strings are exactly the same. If that's the case, then it means that the message received by the webhook is valid. So we can continue. Otherwise, we're gonna get a status 401 saying that the signature verification failed. So it's not really a valid webhook coming from Nylas. So in a sense, Nylas helped our application to make sure that we're receiving something coming from the Nylas server and not coming from somewhere else.
Right. So just to recap that, then, like, basically this is like the end of that handshake piece of it, where first, Nylas is checking just to make sure that your application's legit with the GET request, and then with the POST request, they're going to send we're sending data to your application that gives you a chance to also validate whether or not the POST request is coming from where you think it's coming from, which in this case would be Nylas.
And this is going to happen for every single trigger. So every time we create or we open or we delete an email, this validation is going to be made, so we can rest assured that everything is valid, that everything is coming from the Nylas server. So once we know that it's valid, we just can read the information of the webhook as JSON. And here, what I'm doing is just putting it or sending it to my SQLite database, so that I can have it stored and I can print it out to my website. And here what I'm doing is just displaying the information. I'm creating an ERB page, which is kind of like a HTML page with some Ruby inside. Just gonna say print the ID, print the date, print the title, print who is coming from, who is receiving it, and what's the type of the message.
So in other words, that's of course, like, essentially your homepage, right? So if a browser goes to yourapp.heroku.com, that's the page they're going to receive. And then you're using ERB, which is basically, if you're from JavaScript land, you might think of something like a mustache or something like that lets you, fill out dynamically fill out a page with data that you're receiving.
Yes, exactly.
Cool.
And probably I might need to check this here before I actually publish the blog, because here I'm validating that we're opening the message. Something probably happened, so it didn't read it correctly. That's why it wasn't posted on the database. That's why it wasn't shown or displayed on the web. So
cool. And once you publish that, we can just update, we can update the places where this video lives, which I think are like YouTube and a few other places, with that blog post, so people can kind of follow along with just the fix you do for your own server-side validation.
Yeah, so everything is going to be working fine once the blog is published. Don't worry about it. It's just some hijacks or doing live stream.
Yeah. Hey, Technomos. But this is really cool. And, so I think that just to kind of recap, we talked about today, like what are webhooks, right? And webhooks are basically, almost like flipping the sort of request response responsibilities over REST with an API service provider. So in this case, if something you're interested in happens, Nylas can call your app as opposed to you constantly polling Nylas to get what you need. And in addition to that, we looked at two different ways to leverage webhooks. The Nylas CLI, which makes it, again, like I think it's just like the best way to get started with webhooks for Nylas. It's super, it just feels great, good developer ergonomics. We definitely recommend anyone, regardless of if you're getting started with Nylas webhooks, start there and then move into your language stack. I think you'll have a great experience. But by way of example, we also looked at how to use the Ruby SDK for Nylas to essentially do the same thing. So you've got a page that receives, that will dynamically populate with data, and a server that receives those webhooks, right? And then stores the data from those webhooks into a SQLite database, and then the page will dynamically populate with all of that data. So it's a lot in some ways, but it's a really fun sort of, you can just imagine there's a million things you could do with this kind of workflow. So, and a lot of different technologies that you could put in. So, whether you're using SQLite or for that matter, Ruby or whatever else, you can the concepts remain the same. You can pick your stack. So with that, I think we're going to, it looks like I somehow got a phone call from Slack right in the middle of this. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Stay tuned to the Nylas blog. Why don't we just go ahead and pull up that URL real quick. It's a good place to follow. We put developer content out twice a week there. And yeah, I can't wait to see what you do with Nylas webhooks.
Yep. And here's the documentation just in case. developer.nylas.com. Just look for webhooks and have fun.
Cool. Right. Thanks, Blag. Have a great holiday weekend, and hope the people out there watching do the same.
Thanks. Bye. Take care, guys.